Karen, Director of Coalitions and Campaigns for the Catholic Climate Covenant, to explain how to turn on the Spanish translation. Go ahead, Diana.
Hola a todos. En los controles de su reunión, donde están los tres puntitos, haga clic en Interpretación y de allí haga clic en el idioma que desee escuchar y debe de ver la opción en español. Ahí, para escuchar solo el idioma interpretado, haga clic en Silenciar audio original. Gracias. Y también pueden poner algunas preguntas en el chat y nosotros podemos estar en conversación si tienes alguna pregunta.
Thank you so much, Diana. It is really wonderful to have you all here this evening. And with that, I am honored to introduce Sister Bridget Beers, who will open us in prayer. Sister Bridget is an educator, artist-writer, activist for the Beatitudes, and facilitator of processes to build and strengthen the experiences of communities of dialogue, justice, and hope. She is a member of the Society of Sacred Heart, United States Canada Province, and is currently serving as Associate Director for Transformative Justice for the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. Sister Bridget, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I am so grateful to be here this evening to welcome us into this time together. And so welcome to this few minutes of creating community on behalf of our common home and our desire to break open Magnifica Humanitas. I invite you right now to create the space necessary to do this collective work. By your presence tonight, you are choosing to walk into the space of transforming grace, the work of making something new possible. And so I invite you to join me in setting aside what you have encountered this day and to consciously open your mind, open your spirit, open your heart to this time together. Let's together breathe in the possibility and breathe out the obstacles that prevent our being fully here. Let us pause for just a moment. As we gather, let us bless our panelists and each one of us gathered here, as well as those listening on live stream and those who may encounter our words later as a recording. I want to read two excerpts from Magnifica Humanitas, which speak to me tonight, and invite us then into a minute or two of silence before a brief prayer of blessing. And so dwelling in that stillness, I share these words with you. The civilization of love will not arise from a single or spectacular gesture, but from the sum total of small and steadfast acts of fidelity that serve as a bulwark against dehumanization. At this point, a subtle temptation may emerge, namely the thought that the problems are too big and we are too small, and that our choices therefore cannot make a difference. This is a polite form of resignation, often disguised as realism. Certainly not everyone has the same power to make a difference. There are those who govern, make investment decisions, lead institutions, conduct research, educate, produce or provide information, and then there are those who only seem to live their daily lives. Yet no one is without responsibility. We all have our own areas for action, and it is precisely there and nowhere else that we must choose. And so I invite you to join me in just a moment of silence, that we can dwell in this moment of being willing to be those for whom love takes shape in the way that we choose together, walk together, and believe in what is possible. So let us dwell in that space of being. Confident, abundant God, that you are here present with us, we ask you to open our hearts, open our minds, open our spirits, that we might receive the messages before us and carry them wherever it is that we walk this day and the days ahead of us. May we be those distinctive adults who create a world that is worthy of our children. We ask blessing upon all those who find themselves in harm's way this day, as we hold one another and our world in the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you so much, Sister Bridget. That was a wonderful and powerful way to start the conversation and to root ourselves in where we are and who we are. Thank you truly. With this, I am excited to introduce our esteemed panelists for this evening, brilliant minds, gracious souls, and creative thinkers. Dr. Paul Schurz is the Our Lady of Guadalupe Professor of Theology at the University of Notre Dame and a program chair for the Notre Dame IBM Tech Ethics Lab. Building on dual training in genetics and moral theology, he has published and edited at the intersection of theology, science, medicine, and technology. He is a member of the Vatican Center of Digital Culture's AI Research Group, for which he has co-edited Encountering Artificial Intelligence and Redeeming Human Agency in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, available on open source. Kim Daniels is the director of the Initiative of Catholic Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. She served from 2016 to 2026 as a member of the Vatican Dicastery for Communication, and in the 2021 through 24 Synod on Synodality as an expert participant, and as the coordinator of one of the 10 major synod groups, which focused on the Church's mission in the digital environment. Scott Hurd is Vice President for the Leadership Development and Catholic Identity at Catholic Charities USA. In 2026, he was a Social Innovation Fellow at the University of Notre Dame's Institute for Ethics and the Common Good, where he wrote An Exciting and Fearsome Tool, an artificial intelligence guide for Catholic charities. He has written on AI and tech ethics for National Catholic Reporter, Sapiencia, and Where Peter Is, and has authored 5 books, including Around the Table, retelling the story of the Eucharist through the eyes of Jesus' first followers. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Nicole Flores is Associate Professor of Religious Study at the University of Virginia, where she is also the director of the Catholic Studies Initiative, co-director of the Forum on Religion and Democracy, and director of Health, Ethics, and Society program. She researches the relationship between religion, aesthetics, and democracy, with an emphasis on the Catholic and Latine theological and ethical traditions, and is author of The Aesthetics of Solidarity, Our Lady of Guadalupe and American Democracy. What a fantastic panel. We are so excited for this conversation, and we just want to name from the outset, we are not trying to encapsulate the incredible richness and complexity contained in this document. For that, you got to read it yourselves. This, however, is a conversation among experts with great passion for our faith and the teachings in this encyclical, and we know it'll be fun and filled with insights for all of us. So we will start and end with a question to all panelists, and we'll explore further concepts in between with each individually based on expertise and experience. So with that, let's get started. As an opening conversation question to all, In the Road to Emmaus story, after encountering Jesus on the road, the disciples reflected, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? So, to each of you, when was your heart burning within you while you read this document? I'm going to go ahead and pass it first to Kim.
Well, thank you so much, Anna, and thanks so much to everybody watching and to all of you. I'm just so honored to be on this panel with this wonderful group. For me, the part that really resonated, and as you say, sort of when was my heart burning? It was the section on limits. I found that just so striking. We live in a world that treats limitations as problems to be solved, aging and vulnerability and dependence. And it was just so interesting to me that Pope Leo had this remarkable explanation for why limits are, in fact, what makes us truly human and why we learn about how we learn about dependence and relationality and love through our limits precisely. So much of what happens regarding AI systems is about optimization and productivity and acceleration. And this is just a really countercultural vision in so many ways that the human person doesn't flourish in spite of limitation, but through it.
Thanks so much, Kim. I love that. So lots of nods. Paul, pass it to you now.
Yes, yeah. As Kim said, thank you for inviting me. It's exciting to be here. And I also really enjoyed that section that Kim was highlighting. But I also wanted to point out this section on truth and the selection, the whole section on how do we create a new ecology of communication, which is so important in this time where so many people are denying and can't come to agreement on basic truths or engaging with science. But what was really struck me in that was his focus on how we have to come to truth slowly, how it takes time, kind of this rubbing, this engaging with ideas if we're really going to come deeply into a truth. So I really enjoyed that section.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. That was an amazing section. Nicole, how about for you?
Thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, and I'm really excited to be here this evening. One part that really resonated with me, well, I need to tell it in terms of a story. So the morning that the encyclical was released was Memorial Day here in the United States. So my children were home with me, and I have two young boys, and they were both kind of like, just kind of hanging off my limbs while I was trying to make breakfast and read the encyclical all at the same time. So to try to make it through so I could have something intelligent to say about it by Wednesday, which was the first day that I talked about it in public, I started reading it aloud. And as I was reading it, my 8-year-old son really resonated with something here. So I know this is about him, but it made me really excited too. It's from number 8, where we're talking about the building of the wall, and Pope Leo says the narrative shows how the city is reborn, not through the initiative of one man, but through the shared responsibility of all men, women, priests, artisans, head of households, and young people all play a part. And my 8-year-old's face just lit up. It was so beautiful. And it just struck me in that moment that this document, yes, it's for us. It's for people, all people of goodwill, all Catholic people, all people who are engaging with this from around the world. But in a special way, this is a document for young people who are living through this transition to AI in real time. It's impacting how they're educated, how they're learning about the world. And I really don't want to lose sight for myself of how important this document is for them.
What a beautiful story. And thank you, Nicole. I completely agree. That's fantastic. And Scott, bring us home. How about for you?
Absolutely. And I too have to express my gratitude for the invitation to be a part of this webinar. And given my fellow panelists, I really feel like I'm punching above my weight, but I'm glad to be here. And I have to say that my heart started burning months ago when I first heard the reports that this encyclical was being prepared, because I was so encouraged that Pope Leo was going to speak about AI now and not later. Because I think that if this publication had been delayed, Pope Leo would have missed a critical opportunity to express leadership during what he himself has called a new industrial revolution. We know that the first social encyclical, Rerum Novarum, was issued in response to the last industrial revolution, which, when it was published in 1891, had been unfolding for decades, like 80 years. And suffering and impacted workers had been seeking the church's support, but felt that it wasn't forthcoming. And so many left. And that's why in 1925, Pope Pius XI could lament that, and this is a quote, "The greatest tragedy of the 19th century was the loss of the working class by the church." And thankfully, today is different. Pope Leo XIV has read the room, he's seen the signs of the times, and he's now offered the world a gift through which all of us can try to navigate this new era. And that does make my heart burn with hope.
I love that. Absolutely. It's so profound for these times. Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Scott. So, but Paul, the next question is to you. So I was just looking at your name. That's why I said that. You have named that this is a continued development of the teachings laid forward in Laudato Si, in addition, of course, to the entire compendium of Catholic social doctrine. We've noticed that in the media, there have been some almost pitting the encyclicals against each other, saying this was Pope Francis, this is Pope Leo. Instead, how is this a continued evolution of the teachings of Laudato Si?
Yeah, I mean, as you note, Leo really emphasizes the continuity that he's going with. The first third of the encyclical is a history of CST, right? So this is he's engaging this kind of continuous stream. And in a way, all of CST is somewhat of a response to technology since it arose in response to the mechanization of the Industrial Revolution. But Pope Francis really extended a discussion and organized a discussion that had started with John Paul II and Benedict XVI with particularly modern technologies. And in Laudato Si, he developed it, arguing that technology is not just a neutral instrument, but that there's a worldview that lies behind much of modern technology, a reductive technocratic paradigm that causes us to see the world and the environment around us as mere material for use, and other people as well. You see this line of thought continuing in Magnifica Humanitas, right? It's kind of serves as the baseline that technology is not bad, but it's also not neutral. It depends on the anthropological vision that is undergirding it, that's lying at its base. And he's really concerned that too much of the people and companies that are designing our technologies have a vision of the human that's based in technological power with little thought for the weak. So I think he also talks about this more relational approach and this need for this greater spirituality through the Eucharist and the church, that I think also aligns very well with Francis's response as a need for a new spirituality and a conversion that we see in Laudato Si.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful context. And we know this just continues to build upon each other all the way. So that's so helpful. Nicole, the next question's for you. This encyclical is called Magnificent Humanity. In a time when society can seem to assign worth to people based perhaps on their wealth or efficiency, what is Pope Leo saying about human dignity as a part of God's creation? And what is the importance of embodied traditions and creativity in the work of being fully human?
Thank you so much. This is a great question. And for those of you who have not yet read the document or are trying to annotate your copy of the document, I want to draw your attention to number 52, where Pope Leo does a really great job of distinguishing how dignity is used in various contexts and kind of points out that when we use the language of dignity within our broader culture, we can mean a lot of different things. So he talks and distinguishes between various uses of the terminology such as moral dignity, social dignity, existential dignity. But the document emphasizes that its central concern is for articulating articulating and elaborating what he calls ontological dignity, or the dignity that belongs to every human person by virtue of existing or having been willed, created, and loved by God. No sin, failure, humiliation, or exclusion can diminish the profound value of a human life that God has willed into being. And I think this is the bedrock of the vision of the human that this document offers. I think it's worthwhile to note here that the language of human dignity has a history of development within Catholic social teaching and social tradition. John McGreevy of the University of Notre Dame has a wonderful article out on this in Commonweal that I would direct your attention to. But I also think it's important to note that this bedrock of human dignity is so crucial for what Pope Leo does later in the document at number 176, which is to apologize for the practice of slavery on behalf of the church. And I don't think he could have gotten to that point, at least within this document, of being able to make such a compelling and honestly a stunning statement that we should all be excited about and curious about how he arrived at this point. But he needed to work out what is meant by dignity within the document in order to get to that place of being able to assert human dignity and to acknowledge the ways that dignity had been violated and diminished in the conditions of slavery. And just one more note, and again, I love this document. I want to be very supportive of it. As someone interested in theological aesthetics, I would have loved to see a little bit more about art and the artists within the document. We get little mentions here and there, but this is an area that I would love to see developed in future documents, especially because I don't think that the church is done reflecting on either humanity or AI.
Those are incredibly powerful reflections. Thank you so much, Nicole. And it's so true as we look at the beauty of art and we look at so much of what is at play right now in the midst of it. There's so much intersecting, which leads us actually to our next question to Kim. Even though this encyclical really does talk a lot about AI and is being pitched by the media as the AI encyclical, it's actually much more than that, isn't it? It reflects on social justice, the most vulnerable, labor, democracy, slavery, the technocratic paradigm, disarmament, ecology. I could go on. What's the through line in all of this?
Sure, it's a great question, Anna, and I want to build on what Nicole says because, of course, the through line is human dignity. But I want to be clear, that is the principle at the heart of Catholic social teaching. And it's also true that it is not an abstraction. It is understood here in this document as something very concrete. It is what AI systems will be measured against, the way in which they serve real people, the way in the concrete effects that they have on real people implicate and either help with human flourishing or diminish it. I think what Pope Leo is offering here is what I would call a people-first vision of AI. And he's building, of course, on the rich tradition of Catholic social teaching, as Nicole has talked about. And I also really encourage people to read that John McGreevy article in Commonweal. What he's doing is offering a sort of set of guiding principles rooted very much in the tradition. So the dignity of work, promoting the common good, solidarity and subsidiarity, pointing us all back to that moral vocabulary and architecture to say this is how we should judge and measure AI systems. How are they serving human dignity? How are they serving the flourishing of real people? And that's the question at the heart of all the issues that you mentioned: labor, ecology, democracy, war. Of course, AI is reshaping them in so many different ways. I just want to point out again that what Pope Leo identifies as particularly insidious is this ideology that suggests, as I said before, that limits are a problem, right? That the idea is that a person needs to justify their worth through their sort of productivity or their efficiency. And it's a critique of the kind of logic that often runs through our culture, right? This technocratic paradigm. The apology for slavery, of course, is part of this same through line about human dignity, right? You say that before we can talk about new forms of exploitation in this kind of a culture, we have to be honest about ways in which we have been complicit in old forms of exploitation and ongoing forms of exploitation. And of course, he talks a lot about the environmental costs of artificial intelligence. They follow the same sort of pattern, right? That the most vulnerable are often the ones who feel those costs first. That data centers are built in places where people who live in poverty are and who don't have the political power to resist them, or at least to sort of help design the framework around which they are regulated. So again, what holds it all together is this idea of human dignity and of safeguarding the human person, which is, of course, the subtitle of the document.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Kim. And I love so much of what you said and how he ties that through in the encyclical too, all the way from the human dignity of taking action to the call to waste time with each other, right? And go against this idea of efficiency. Scott, there is this saying that encyclicals only matter if we give them legs, working for the Laudato Si movement, that tries to give Laudato Si legs. You have done incredible research into the ethical considerations of AI, from labor to cultural implications to environmental exploitation. Practically speaking, now, to what Kim was speaking about, what might implementing this encyclical look like in a few settings? A parish, a school, a business? What does ethical engagement with AI mean for us everyday Catholics?
Sure, and thank you. That's such a critical question because the new encyclical lays out these fundamental ethical principles, but I think a lot of people are wondering, where does the rubber meet the road? What product should I use? What company should I engage with? If every financial purchase is a moral act, what choices should I make? What choices should I not be making? And then, with all the hype around AI and the speed at which AI is coming at us, there's a growing and I think very real fear of being left behind. And that's why I'm so grateful that in this encyclical, Pope Leo invites all of us to, and these are my words, not his, to take a deep breath and slow down. I'd like to point everyone to paragraph 106, in which Leo assures us, and this is a quote, that a slower pace in adopting AI does not mean opposing progress. Instead, it is an exercise of responsible care for the human family. I think that's so important. And he goes on in the next sentence to explain that this is because tech generally develops much faster than we can try to safeguard it or put guardrails around it or even understand it. A friend of mine who's actually a colleague of Paul's says, trying to stay on top of AI is like trying to lasso lightning. And I get that. But you asked about what can parishes or schools or business do to implement AI at this point, and all of those institutions have different needs and concerns related to this new technology, and that's probably a subject for a whole other webinar at some future point. But I'd like to suggest that if all of them approach adopting AI in a slower and measured and prudential way, like Pope Leo suggests, Catholic organizations can demonstrate a better way forward at this critical moment in history, one that is human first and not AI first. And I think that that's a real gift that we can give to the world.
I love that. And I love all the more that Sister Bridget started us with that deep breath and you're bringing us back to it. What a powerful reflection. Thank you. Paul, to build on this, you've spent a lot of time researching with the Vatican about what ethical use of AI and technology might look like. What, in your opinion, are sort of main discernment factors about AI and our use of it?
Yeah, and it's important to note that AI is not one thing. We frequently talk about AI as like, the AI is out there, but in fact, AI is all around us and is in so many applications right now. I mean, and so our ethical reflections and discernments sort of differ whether an AI is being used to help, say, researchers come up with new materials for use in solar cells, or one that's just assisting with billing or logistics or back office tasks versus an AI chatbot replacing a doctor versus like an AI friend that is driving a teen to suicide, right? So these all bring up different issues. So the first thing is that we really have to be specific in when we're engaging these things. Um, and part of this is important to discern what's the vision of the person that's lying behind the technology. Um, is it this kind of sense of power, or is this acceptance of weakness rather than just trying to optimize others? Part of that is that AI should be designed to complement human work as much as possible rather than replacing, right? So people talk about augmentation. Third, as Scott was saying, we have to learn to exercise restraint when we're using AI, not just use it all the time, right? We need to allow space for the embodied, for relational aspects of human life, and for the contemplative to shine through. And the last aspect is a major emphasis in this encyclical and other Catholic teaching is we can't leave major decisions on the lives of people in warfare or in for parole or in job placement in the hands of an AI alone. There has to be accountability and transparency for how the AI is being used. These responsibilities for these decisions have to rest with the human agent, who's the only person that can have that kind of conscience. But again, there's a lot of different things to bear depending on what area of life you're dealing with. And that's what, as Pope Leo says, he notes that there's a whole ecosystem that's developing of church documents, papal speeches around AI that he's presuming and say he admits like this isn't everything about AI, right? This is kind of a growing body of thought.
Thank you so much. Absolutely, right? That human first space, that breathing, but to remember that it's changing and that it's the growing body and the continued individual reflection as it's so complex in itself too. To shift gears a little bit, Nicole, this encyclical also speaks at length about democracy. Pope Leo talks about non-state actors influencing economics, culture, and so much more. Can you open up some key takeaways from that part? And how might us, multilateral state institutions, push back on these non-state actors?
This is a great question. Thank you. I think democracy is a really significant theme within the document. But I think one way that I've been trying to process it, because we're still in early days, we're still trying to make sense of everything that's there, is through the lens of the technocratic paradigm, which has appeared now in Laudato Si and Magnifica Humanitas. So the use of this paradigm, I think, is really important because it's pointing to the ways that that the paradigm can erode democracy, or maybe a colloquial way of understanding this is people power, the ability for people in their neighborhoods and parishes and local communities to really form community together, and then for our ability to form the common good on local, national, and global levels. So that paradigm really influences how we think about people. And as we were already discussing, our understanding of human dignity, the kind of instrumentalization of humanity, and gesturing back to Laudato Si, the ongoing kind of prevalence of the throwaway culture. I think that one of the crucial things for understanding what and how democracy is working with this document. Paul already mentioned it at the beginning of the conversation. It's the reaffirmation of truth, which is a central democratic norm, and one that not just within the United States, but and I see in the chat people are phoning in from all over the world. But I think in the global the context of global democracy, a lot of our societies have seen a real struggle with truth. And that filtering down into the culture in ways that are um, uh, uh, allowing for societies and social trust to disintegrate. So while I do think it's really important to stress the significance of organizations, NGOs and others having power, I really think that where the document shines is emphasizing people power. Is emphasizing the way that local communities and even families, even 8-year-old kids, can get involved. And this is to Scott's earlier point. It's asking us to discern, what should we be purchasing? Maybe what should we not be purchasing? What should we be doing with our Sunday night? Should we be on our iPads or should we be having a Sunday night dinner? Should we be browsing through our phones while football is on the television, or should we be reading to our kids? And it's helping us to discern that that's a democratic practice, and that's a way that the church as the body of Christ can continue to contribute to the broader culture of democracy that I think people of goodwill are trying to create throughout the world.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, the call forward into discernment in every moment towards the individual action and the empowerment of the individual. We've talked about that a few times, but how often we're told that we're too small, but it's up to each of us, right? Kim, Pope Leo speaks and calls for disarmament in this work, not just of AI, but across society, from our language to the way that we do business to, of course, war itself. Can you speak a little bit to the significance of his language here, and in particular, maybe what he's saying about the just war theory?
Sure. Thanks very much for that. I think this language has really been picked up, particularly in the secular press, around sort of what stands out in Pope Leo's language. And again, it's deliberately strong language. And he says that he deliberately chose it for this reason, because he wanted to call attention to cut through the noise and to say we need to have an authentic reckoning with how AI is being built into weapon systems, how it accelerates and automates lethal decisions, how it reshapes what war looks like. So he's in one way, very specifically looking at war. But I also want to be very clear that he's talking about something much broader when he uses the language of disarming AI, right? He says he extends this to language and to economics, to culture. He sees this logic we've been talking about at work, right? The logic of domination, the logic that sees human beings as somehow less than if they don't live up to these kinds of standards of productivity and efficiency and power. He sees that as something to resist. And he recognizes that AI doesn't cause this logic, right? Laudato Si talked about the technocratic paradigm, obviously, and identified it. But what AI is doing is supercharging that logic, right? Is accelerating it and is putting it into so many dimensions of life that it's something we need to be very much aware of. On the just war framework, I think that what's interesting is that Pope Leo really does call it outdated here. And what's he saying? He's certainly not calling out or repudiating the right to self-defense. He very clearly says that that remains for sure. But he's recognizing that these autonomous weapon systems really are changing how war is conducted. And in many ways, they've outrun the categories that just war theory was built for. And so questions of proportionality and discriminating between combatants and civilians, and most of all, I think human accountability for these lethal decisions, when they're made by an algorithm at speed, that's something very different. And he's saying that we have to have a human having moral responsibility for lethal decisions. And if not, that whole system is a problem. So this connects to this whole broader disarmament theme. I think it's really a central argument for the encyclical, and one we should all explore and pay attention to.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's some people that have followed Pope Leo for a while say, of course he talks about disarmament. It is so core to his message, and it's so core to this document. Paul, in this document, Pope Leo calls for new collaborations and intentional work to do things like defend the rights of workers, set environmental standards, and set adequate policy regulations upon the use of AI. what kinds of regulations might we be particularly advocating for, which would center the experiences and lived realities of?
Yeah, so I think the focus on collaboration and community here is central to the document. Leo really emphasizes that what he is focusing on is less specific regulations, right? He's talking about he's developing principles, leaving it to the prudence of governments to do this. He does place very specific recommendations for policies in particular places. So with jobs, he talks about job retraining programs should be provided, and there should be a protection of youth jobs. And he's very strong with certain protection of young people's and the ability to do age verification and things like that to protect them from AI. But in general, he's calling less for specific regulation than for new governance structures, right? And this is what Nehemiah is calling for. We need to organize this in the way that Nehemiah did, in which he allowed people to take charge of their own activity. And what he's pointing to is that power over these technologies has been concentrated in a very few large corporations that even states can't govern, right? So even states are having problems developing these regulations. What we need is kind of to embrace that classic Catholic principle of subsidiarity and these aspects that Nicole was talking about earlier, that we need participation of all different levels of society, especially the vulnerable and those most affected, in contesting the implementation of the and shaping the implementation of these technology, right? So technology, new AI shouldn't just be imposed on people. People need to have input on how their data is being used and what technologies are being kind of employed in their workplaces, right? So many educational technologies just appear in schools without any kind of input on by teachers, right? We need to have the local organizations, local school board, teachers, parents be involved in these decisions. Doctors were forced to implement electronic medical records, and now they're feeling this kind of pressure to implement AI. What he's saying, we really need to have these collaborative subsidiary structures that actually have the ability to contest how these are being implemented.
Thank you so much. That's an incredibly helpful reframing. Scott, you work with Catholic Charities, which does amazing work with people who society often pushes to the margins, these most vulnerable that Pope Leo speaks about. What does this reflection on the magnificence of humanity mean to you? How does this call to recognize the inherent dignity of people impact how we are called to interact with and move at the speed of the most vulnerable, including its impact on our ecological well-being?
Well, thank you. This encyclical is so inspiring to organizations like Catholic Charities, and I imagine many of the organizations that are co-sponsoring this webinar, because it celebrates every person's magnificence. Hence the title of the encyclical. Because they are loved by God and created in God's image. And that truth is certainly at the heart of Catholic Charities' mission and the mission of so many Catholic institutions. And it's also a truth that I think we have an opportunity at this moment to shout from the rooftops, because in this technological age, people are increasingly reduced to data points, and they're valued only for their productivity or their efficiency, what they are able to do. And such an anthropology obviously devalues the elderly or the sick or persons with disabilities. But ultimately, if you think about it, it devalues everyone, because human beings are not machines and we are persons, not products. And that's why, in the face of these new threats to what he calls dehumanization, Pope Leo in this encyclical calls us to follow the example of the Good Samaritan and address all of the suffering that we see and encounter around us. And can AI and other new technologies assist this? Yes, they can, but to a point. Because, and this is certainly coming from the Catholic Charities perspective, the human element in accompanying fellow human beings on their healing journey can never be fully supplanted by tech. And something to allude to something that Paul said earlier, algorithms should not be making final decisions for people's lives because machines cannot account for a person's capacity for growth and for change. I think the bottom line there is statistical prediction machines, which is at the heart of what AI is, they won't build the civilization of love. That building is up to us.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Scott. Absolutely. The individual accompaniment. Nicole, in paragraph 110, something particularly powerful to the planning committee of this webinar, Pope Leo speaks about the environmental impact of AI. And we've spoken a little bit about this already, but saying, quote, and I'll read here, the gains in efficiency and the potential to improve certain services are clear. Yet rapidly and uncritically adopting them exposes us to a range of risks, including the tendency to overlook the environmental impact. Current AI systems require enormous amounts of energy and water, significantly influencing carbon dioxide emissions, and place heavy demands on our natural resources. The United Nations has declared that we are globally in a state of water bankruptcy, which is being massively accelerated by AI data centers. We're kind of at a breaking point, as Pope Francis said in Laudate Deum. Can you speak about what listening to the cry of the earth might look like in our engagement with AI?
Yes. Well, and I know we all keep gesturing back to the technocratic paradigm, but I think it's so crucial for framing here. I think when we're listening and discerning the cry of the earth, so much of that has to be being aware of the scope of this paradigm and the way that it has shaped our interactions with the natural world in ways that are, well, to use the language of Catholic world theology, in ways that are vicious, in ways that are just not attending to what is needed for our ecosystems to continue to thrive. This past week, I had the privilege of walking through the Borgoletta Tosi at the Papal Gardens at Castel Gandolfo, and just taking in the birds of the air and the trees, and there was even like wheat and such. That was so beautiful, and reflecting on how our popes have been shaped by this particular place in this particular land, but also seeing how our Holy Father, Pope Leo, but Francis before him, and Benedict before him, who was, lest we forget, the first green Pope, or the first one to be called the Green Pope, have been praying and discerning what might be good for not just the common good of all humans, but the common good of all creation from that very place. So I think that's really very crucial. But I think there's a question within the document that is really important to ask ourselves in relation to the entire ecological and created order. And that is when Pope Leo asks us, what are we building? And that question really, hit different with me, as the kids say, because it reminded me of another question asked by Hannah Arendt, who is also cited in the document, who calls us to, quote, think what we are doing. And those two questions together, what are we building? And to think what we're doing, for me, I think that's really crucial for discerning the cry of the earth. What is it that we're building? How much water are we throwing away to build it? How many human lives, but also creaturely lives, are we displacing to achieve this end? So if we could ask those questions, what are we building? And if we can challenge ourselves to think what we're doing, perhaps those can be some good guideposts for thinking about the implications of this document for AI and and our ecological lives together.
That's so powerful. Thank you for those questions, Nicole. That's a great discernment tool. Scott, I'm going to bump it back to you just to expand a little bit more on this. Pope Leo explicitly names, quote, an integral ecology combining care for our common home with preferential option for the poor. To what extent do you see this document as an application of the lens of integral ecology, to our current times?
Absolutely. As Nicole was just saying, Magnifica Humanitas builds upon Laudato Si, Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical, in which he embraced that concept of integral ecology, or the interconnection between human society and the environment. And that's why care for our common home and the preferential option for the poor should and can be understood together. But Magnifica Humanitas expands upon that and explains that the benchmark, that's the encyclical's word, the benchmark for evaluating integral ecology is integral human development, which basically, if you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much Catholic insider baseball, integral human development are basically all of those factors that contribute to human flourishing. Physical, psychological, spiritual, and social. And the underlying message here is that we cannot understand how human beings flourish if we don't understand what a human being is. No, we are not, as Pope Leo insists, and Nicole, I think you made reference to this, we are not a project to be optimized with tech or with anything else. Instead, we are, quote, persons called to relationship and communion. And as Kim said, we have these inherent limitations that lead us to compassion and to trust and to love. And to put it colloquially, these limitations we have are a feature and not a bug. And I think that's a critical distinction. And so, given this rich understanding of the human person, in what sort of environment do human beings flourish? Pope Leo calls that throughout the encyclical a civilization of love. And that's what he calls us to build together upon foundations of truth and beauty and justice and the common good.
How beautiful. I want to be in that civilization of love. Let's build it together. Here we go. Kim, we're going to keep playing a little more insider Catholic baseball, to Scott's phrase. For those who are familiar with Catholic social doctrine, the principles of preferential option for the poor, solidarity, and subsidiarity are likely a bit more familiar. They're in a lot of those lists. But this, quote, universal destination of goods that Pope Leo calls forward might be a bit unfamiliar. Can you share a bit more about this core tenet of Catholic social doctrine and how it relates to what Pope Leo is talking about?
Sure. The universal destination of goods is the teaching that the earth's goods are meant for everyone, not just those who hold legal title to them. So the idea, of course, is that private property is legitimate for sure, but it carries a social mortgage. The idea is that ownership comes with obligations to the common good. And in the context of AI, it applies directly to the data that is used and algorithms and how they work, right? So it holds that we're in this encyclical, Pope Leo is saying the data is generated by all of us. In some sense, it belongs to all of humanity, and it shouldn't be exclusively owned and controlled by and profited by a small number of private actors. That's the basis for the encyclical's argument that data should be managed for the common good. And that's why we have a lot of you'll see legislation out there right now, right? With our legislators and regulators and others talking about how do we make sure that the dividends of AI essentially really do flow to the people, and how can there are lots of ways we could talk about that in a different conversation, but it's certainly at the heart of how we should respond to this as citizens, as advocates, et cetera. We need to think about what it means to have a universal destination of goods operate in this particular context for the common good. And I want to be clear that that also involves, of course, creation. This principle of the universal destination of goods has always included the natural world, right? We have to remember that care for our common home is inseparable from care for the poor. And again, as we've said several times, that the environmental costs of AI too often fall on communities who are least able to absorb them. And this is a pattern that this principle of the universal destination of goods is designed to address or meant to address. And then just one final point is that Leo puts this again in this development, he puts it in the context of this development of the tradition of Catholic social teaching, right? Rerum Novarum sets up the idea that there are social obligations to property ownership, and then Laudato Si extends that to the earth itself. And now Magnifica Humanitas is saying that also is extended to data and algorithms and the digital infrastructure. So I think it's just a really interesting, again, example of how Catholic social teaching, Catholic social doctrine is developed in this document.
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful exploration of it. We know that we're getting close to the end of our hour together, but this conversation is so rich. And so we hope that everyone can stay on for just a few minutes beyond our scheduled time to finish it out with two more questions for our panelists and one exciting pitch of how we are offering a way to take a deep breath together in community. So stay tuned for that. But before that, we want to do a quick fire round for everybody on the panel. And it's just a one sentence answer. Pope Leo lays out the scenario very clearly, which we've named, which has been talked about on this webinar. Our choices are contributing to what we're building, right? As Nicole said, whether we're building Babel or Jerusalem, following Nehemiah. We know this may change with time because we're in the early days, but how has this encyclical changed or deepened how you're living your life and your faith? Nicole, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, thank you. Well, it goes back to that opening story. That was where I was reading this aloud with my 8-year-old, and then I get to the end of the document later when I was no longer reading aloud to him. But one of the practical suggestions of read a book to a child, read out loud to a child, right? I'm an elder millennial, which means I was born in the early '80s, and my adult development kind of lined up with the rapid acceleration of technology. I've always had access to computers and phones and mobile things and things that ding and bing and such. So this document is calling me to continue the discipline of putting those things to the side and opening a good book with my kids. I think that is one way to enter the world of the document.
Beautiful. I love that as a young mom myself. Paul, how about for you?
Yeah, mine also refers back to the my first point about slowness and slowing down for kind of a certain contemplating the truth and coming to truth. And it's even with academics who are just sitting around reading all the time, it's sometimes difficult to slow down. And so that's been something I've been working on.
Powerful. Scott? Oh, shoot, you're on mute, Scott.
Okay, there we go. My finger was not working. I have to confess that before ChatGPT exploded on the scene in late 2022, I had never given much thought to how technology shapes how we understand ourselves, can shape how we relate to the world around us, and even can shape how we understand God. And now, nearly 4 years later, I confess I think about it all the time.
Thanks, Scott. Absolutely. And Kim?
I think the encyclical has deepened my conviction that the work of translating principles into practice is central to what it means to be faithful right now. And we can't leave that to somebody else. We can each do something. There's a way in which we look at this as an overwhelming problem. And one of the main thrusts of the encyclical is we all do have agency. We can all do something. That's our responsibility right now.
Amen. I love it. So we're going to take a quick break before the last final question. You want to hang on for that. I am many of the organizations sponsoring this webinar have a particular invitation to each of you who are listening to the webinar, gathered here this evening and watching it later on recording. This is an invitation to help give the encyclical legs, so to speak. So I'm very excited to invite my colleague, Alyssa Wright, North America Programs Manager for Laudato Si Movement, to share a teaser of this information. Alyssa, how do we give this legs?
Yes, as you have heard today from our panelists and from Pope Leo's encyclical, from the Pope himself, I would say, We are facing a rise of individualism and a false sense of self-reliance. As we know, as we've heard from the panel, this false sense of self-reliance that us as people can just do everything. And it has reigned so long. And it has gotten us in this deeply complex situation we're in. I'm sure many of you face this reality in your everyday life, where we see this polycrisis we face today with mental health, specifically with young people, mental health across the board, democracy, war, ecological, and so much more. And once again, our fathers, our church, our holy fathers, both Pope Leo and Pope Francis, are showing us a way forward through the path of spirit-led community, seated through synodal conversations, which are an open space for us to see the human dignity of each other, the human connection that each one of you listening to this webinar, myself too, that our hearts long for, because this is how we're created. And so to respond to this challenge in a gospel-inspired spirit of hope, we are inviting you to gather people around you to have a cry of the earth and a cry of the poor synodal listening session during the season of creation, September 1st through October 4th. And what does this mean? Is we are inviting you to join us for an orientation call on June 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The link is in the chat and also the QR code is on the screen. It will be recorded, so please register if you still cannot make it. Please register and you will receive the recording. And as we know, this encyclical requires a response from us, a yes, that we are going to do something with it, that it's not just going to be a paper that we read and we speak all these ideas, which we often can face, even myself, is have all these great ideas. This is a way that we can respond, not only in our hearts, but through our actions, a way to put our faith into practice, and a way not only to build a better future for ourselves, but a better future for everyone. So we invite you to join us, and thank you so much for your time. I'll hand it back to Anna.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. And we truly hope that all of you join us as we put our legs to work. We walk with our prayers as we move this forward. So please register with the link in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And now to close this wonderful conversation, all good things must come to an end. We are going to end with one last question for all the panelists. And this is a bit of flipping the script. We know many wonderful questions have come in through the chat, but more than takeaways, we hope that each of you listening to this webinar or recording are inspired to read the encyclical in full. So as we close this webinar, to each of you panelists, what question would you suggest everyone listening here hold in mind as they read the encyclical? I will go ahead and start with Scott.
Thank you. So in paragraph 170, Pope Leo speaks of a need for what he calls digital sobriety. And so as our listeners today make their way through the encyclical, I would encourage them to ask themselves, what can I do to foster digital sobriety in my life and in the lives of others so that AI can uplift human dignity and not undermine it?
Thank you, Scott. Kim.
So I would say, as you read it, ask, where do I see this logic that Pope Leo is critiquing, the logic that measures human worth by efficiency and productivity? Where do I see it operating in my own context, work, family, community? And what would it look like to resist that? Small actions, that's what he's calling for.
Beautiful. How about for you, Paul? What question?
I would ask, what are the relationships that you can build or participate in to form networks that will allow you to deal with the problems raised by AI, both broadly in society, but also more specifically in your community, in your schools, in your workplaces?
Beautiful. And Nicole, bring us home.
To return to the question I opened with, what does this document have to say about young people, and what truth does it speak to the young? When we think about the preferential option for the poor, we often forget that it's the preferential option for the poor and young. And when we think about not just our generation, but the next generation, if we think about the principle of to the seventh generation, what does this document mean for the care of humanity, but the care of our common home well into the future, well beyond our time, our personal time here on Earth. So yeah, that's my question.
These are all fantastic questions. And truly, our deepest gratitude is to each of these panelists today. Thank you so much. Another huge thank you to our interpreter. Veronica, you've been amazing to stick with us this whole time as we've been speaking so quickly. And a thank you to all of the attendees this evening and who will be watching afterwards. This encyclical gives us hope when we know people are living it out. And so it is a gift and an honor to be with all of you. And just again, all of these wonderful collaborating organizations with deep gratitude for everyone who's working together as we work to give this encyclical legs and live it out. We will be following up within the week with the recording. We'll also send out these last 4 questions so you can hold them in mind as you go. And in that, we hope everyone has a wonderful evening and a wonderful time reading the encyclical. Thank you again so much. Wonderful. Well, as everyone's logging off again in the silence, just truly, Scott, Kim, Paul, Nicole, thank you so